I'm not sure if you're a good news first or a bad news first kind of person, but a woman who had just given birth fell into a coma. After she came out of it, the doctor came and said, I've got good news and I have bad news. The good news is you had twins, a boy and a girl, and both are healthy. The bad news is your brother had to name them. Oh no, not my brother, she said. What did he name my daughter? Denise, the doctor said. Well, that's not so bad, said the woman. What did he name my son? The nephew. Now, I mention that because I think when it comes to the Christian life, there is kind of a good news and a bad news aspect of it. Maybe not completely bad news, but at least hard news. I mean, all the things we know about God in terms of He being a good and powerful God, that He's made a plan for us, He's made provision for our lives, all good news. But the things He calls us to be and to do as followers of Him, well, it can just be hard. To deny yourself, to carry your cross, to love your enemies, to do good to those who persecute you. I think when we continue to make our way through chapter 12 in the book of Romans, we're starting to get into some of those things that are challenging, but I think there's good news in that as well, but we will get to that. So if you can turn to Romans 12:12, if you're not there already, that's where we left off last week, and it's interesting that we concluded the praise time with that song, It Is Well With My Soul, because the thing I have in my notes is how important it is for us to internalize the responsibility we have over our souls. Then when we think about the things that are going down there in terms of our thoughts, in terms of our conscience, in terms of our emotions, that is our responsibility. We can't blame anyone for any of it. We can't say, you make me angry, you make me this. No, it's how we perceive. It's how we internalize. It's how we react. There's a little interesting interaction between my daughter and my grandson. Now, my grandson is 3. He doesn't really communicate all that well. But basically, she said, Warren, are you happy right now? And he said, no. And she said, well, are you sad? And he said, well, yes. And she said, well, why? And he said, I don't know. And I said, well, what a sad state to be in. First of all, to think that maybe just because I'm not exuberantly happy, I must be sad. And then to be sad and then not know why. And it all speaks to the fact that, we really have to be aware of those negative emotions that exist in our souls. Fear, anger, sadness, anxiety, insecurity. Because all that God has for us, there's an answer for that. And we have to cling to that truth that breaks us out of those places so that now our souls are primed when we're in a situation, we're not reacting from negative emotion. We're not reacting from negative thought because the power of God, the Word of God, the renewing of our minds basically allows us to be the kind of people God desires for us to be. Now, naturally, that all flows from the whole idea of what we saw last week where we ended, to be joyful in hope. Remember that? That in spite of maybe what's going on today, I have hope for tomorrow in terms of what God will bring. And I'm able to be joyful. I'm able to have peace at all times. And so even to say that it is well with my soul, that is true in terms of the faith that God brings us to. I do find it interesting that we check our heart rate, we check our weight, we check ourselves in the mirror, we make adjustments, but how often do we check our souls and see where we are in terms of those negative emotions? And just making sure that, again, if I'm sad because a sad thing happened, that's fine. It's not like it's not wrong to have those negative emotions. You have those emotions because God gave you those emotions. But we have to make sure that we don't respond and react from those emotions because of the truth of God. And so as we move on from, again, it says, in 12:12, where we're being joyful in hope, patient in affliction, faithful in prayer. And this patient in affliction is kind of where we get a little bit of the hard stuff in terms of what God is expecting of us in terms of the way we live our lives. And so when we look at this phrase, patient in affliction, again, very interesting words going on. That word patience is hupomone. If you look at perseverance, you look at patience, really, whenever you see that in the New Testament, more often than not, it is this word hupomeno, and it means to remain under, to stay under something. The affliction in the Greek points to being under pressure, a pressing together. I mean, do we ever feel squeezed by life or people? I think we all kind of know, like I've got the weight of the world on me, I'm carrying this big load. We even have these phrases that speak to that. Well, if you know that, or if you experience that, you've said that, you kind of get a picture of what Paul is presenting here. But whereas our default, our desire normally is when we're under that pressure, when we've got that strain, when we've got that suffering, we want to find that way of escape. We want to find that way to get out of it. And again, that's what hupomeno says. Don't do that. That we are to remain under the things that God places in our lives. The other thing we recognize as far as the next slide is that when we think about affliction, it will come. It's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. Again, the world is deteriorating, you're deteriorating, morals are deteriorating. What the Bible gives is a picture of what life is going to be as we continue to be here. It's going to get bad before it gets better, and in fact, it will only get better by virtue of God and what He'll restore and initiate in terms of the world. And so therefore, it's just a question of if, or when rather, in terms of when affliction will come. It is interesting when we think about affliction, it really does have various kinds and various sources. I'm curious in terms of just the way I observe myself, what I observe other people, is that what's an affliction to one person isn't an affliction to another. That you might be going through something, and someone will look at your life and say, I can't believe you're going through that. That would put so much pressure on me. That would be so challenging for me. And you're like, it's not really a big deal. But then you go through something that they say, it's not real. So this affliction is very personal in nature. And no one has a right to kind of go to you and say, oh, really, you should be handling this better. You go before God in terms of how, I should say, if you're close to someone, you might say that. But just the whole idea, though, being is that we're staying under that pressure. Again, we're being patient in affliction. And so therefore, when we think about, again, the normal thing that we would do, God is saying you've got to be different in terms of that. See, we bear under it rather than looking for a way of escape, because that is God's prerogative. Again, when you escape, how you escape, that is for God to determine. When we think about all that God says that He would seek to accomplish through our suffering, I think that's what we need to focus our attention on. See, we don't ask why me, we ask why this. In other words, why has God allowed this to be present in my life? What have I done to create this? Am I the source of my affliction? Am I the source of my suffering? Sometimes that is the case. That I've done what I've done to create the situation that I'm in. So there's really no one else to blame but myself. But again, God still has an answer to that. God still has an answer in terms of forgiveness. He still has an answer in terms of truth and transformation, in terms of what He will do to bring you out of something. But to stay, particularly if you're bearing the consequences of sin, don't escape that. That basically you embrace that for what God is teaching you, what He's training you in. You think about what affliction does in terms of building faith, what it does to build dependence. What we tend to do when all of a sudden affliction comes, we are more conscious of God. We are more aware of the disciplines of the Christian life and engaging in the Word or engaging in prayer or reaching out to other people, whatever it might be. And so there's so many good things that God would seek to develop. And so therefore, if our focus in that time is to escape, we're not going to be learning the lesson. In fact, what I have found with God is if you escape the lesson, He'll bring the lesson back. So far better just take your licks, learn your lesson, and then move on in terms of what He's doing. So again, it's just another aspect of what God calls us to as His people, as followers of Jesus. Again, patient in affliction. Now, do you know that natural diamonds will only be formed under great pressure and temperature? And so therefore, I think that's a great analogy in terms of what happens when we are under pressure, when the temperature of our lives gets increased and we persevere through it, that again, we allow God to do His forming, His shaping, His lessons, so then what we come out is something very beautiful, that is very valuable in terms of what God is producing in us. But you can see, if we're not hupomenoing, if we're not bearing under it, if we're not staying there, then that lesson will be lost on us. But again, that is hard. It's hard to do that. But the good news is that it is God who gives us the capacity to do it. Whenever it comes to the hard things that God calls us to, even though they are hard, the good part of it is God enables it. God empowers it. God is always on the backside providing power and strength. And He's always on the front side in terms of giving blessing and promising good things in terms of reward when we are faithful to Him. And I do believe, too, that when we ultimately see the overcoming nature of the Christian life, the overcoming nature of saying, again, I don't need circumstances to be a certain way for me to be at peace. I don't need people to be a certain way for me to be at peace. See, the minute you're patient in affliction, now all of a sudden you learn kind of the glory of affliction, the wonder of suffering. And it's like, well, that's not so bad when I deal with it under Christ. Loving enemies, well, something I didn't die or whatever in terms of doing that. So now all of a sudden, well, why? I used to deal with troubled kids, and I would go to certain kids who try to pull one over on me or intimidate me with their aggression, and I would always point to my worst kid and say, I've had that guy. You're nothing compared to that guy. So if I'm able to deal with this situation, well, then I'm able to deal with this, right? And that's part of what God wants to do. He wants the affliction that we undergo to teach us and train us so that now we're not afraid of affliction. We're not afraid of suffering. If all of a sudden bad things happen, well, here's another one. Here's another opportunity for me to grow. Here's another opportunity for me to glorify God. Here's an opportunity for me to be a witness, for me to defy people around me to say, why are you at peace? Why are you still loving? Why are you still kind? Why are you looking at other people and taking care of them when you're going through such bad things? Well, that's part of being connected to Jesus. And that's what He affords. And so there's just so many good things that happen from that. And we just have to be inclined and connected to the purpose of God and His priorities rather than our own. And so be joyful in hope, be patient in affliction, and persevere or be faithful in prayer is what the NIV says here. But again, another strong word that is given here. Faithful really doesn't cut the mustard in terms of what Paul is expressing here. That word faithful in the Greek means to persevere, to give constant attention to a thing, be devoted to, be steadfastly attentive to. And so therefore the question becomes, how's your prayer life? Again, are those words reflective of the prayer life that you and I have? That's the first thing to ask. Again, do we persevere in it? Do we give constant attention to it? Are we devoted to it? Are we steadfastly attentive to it? I think when it comes to prayer, I think that is one of the most untapped aspects of the Christian life. That I think it's very few people that I meet as believers that say, something, I really have an engaged and powerful prayer life. I think most of us don't. I know for myself, I'm an action-oriented person. You give me something to do, it's right there before me, I'll do it. Tell me I have to sit down and speak in silence to someone or think thoughts towards someone, that's hard for me to do. ADHD or whatever I've got, that is just difficult for me. But again, that's to me, this is the hard stuff. Be patient in affliction, be fervent in prayer. What? It's a great thing. It's one of the great privileges we have to think that we as human beings have access to the throne of God, access to the provision of God, access to the person of God. I think we miss a great aspect of prayer if we think the greatest thing that happens in prayer is that we get things. I mean, I think that's one of the most destructive things to prayer, is to think that prayer is about getting things. Because then if we don't need anything, well, we don't pray. If what I do when I pray is I ask God for things and He provides, well, I don't need anything, so why would I pray? See, that's what's broken there. That prayer isn't mainly about that. Prayer is mainly about engaging in a relationship, fellowship with God, sharing your life with Him, letting Him share His thoughts with you in terms of just becoming the person that God wants you to be and being oriented to His will. Two quotes there are so many quotes on prayer that are great, but two that I picked for this morning is, as John Bunyan says, you can do more than pray after you have prayed, but you can't do more than pray until you have prayed. Yes, God calls us to activity. Yes, God calls us to action. God calls us. We're not praying all the time, but until we have prayed, there's nothing more important. Like if we engage in anything in our lives outside of praying, we've missed something. Even in terms of just recognizing God's authority over something, recognizing God's presence in something. Again, prayer is it's practicing that presence of God. Can't remember the author of that book, but that constant prayer, pray always, as it says in 1 Thessalonians chapter 5. Again, it's just that constant awareness of God's presence in my life. It's that constant awareness to say, God, I need you to be involved. I want you to be involved. I want to recognize you're involved, that you have purposes, you have plan, that you're always trying to accomplish something, or at least potentially accomplishing anything, if not just me building my faith and my awareness of you. Another states this, is prayer is surrender. Surrender to the will of God and cooperation with that will. If I throw out a boat hook from a boat and catch a hold of the shore and pull, do I pull the shore to me, or do I pull myself to the shore? Prayer is not pulling God to my will, but aligning of my will to the will of God. I love that analogy in terms of just a picture of prayer. Obviously, you're moving. You've set that hook on the shore and you're pulling. You're moving, but you're not pulling the shore to you. You're not saying, God, I'm going to make you do what I'm going to make you do what I want. No. See, we have to remember the umbrella that exists over every prayer is your kingdom come, your will be done. Not my will be done. And so therefore, with the faith that God calls us to, we engage in prayer. But, the greatest expression of that faith in prayer is by praying. In other words, if we say, I have great faith in prayer, but I don't pray, guess what? You don't have great faith in prayer because you're not praying. I mean, part of believing in prayer is to pray. And to be constant attention, to be persevering in, to be fervent about. Again, that's what Paul calls us to. And, I think too, like remembering that, the way this love must be sincere, kind of being an umbrella for this passage in terms of all things being a support of love being sincere or an expression of love being sincere. I think to the extent that we think that we can live the Christian life outside of God's resources, we're making a mistake. If you wonder, well, why is this broken? Why is my parenting suffering? Why is my marriage suffering? Why is my relationship with my neighbor suffering? Why do I have issues with this? Well, am I fully engaged in the things that God would have me be engaged in? Primarily prayer? Primarily in the Word? Primarily with God's people? Primarily in worship? If I'm not doing those things, then I'm not availing myself of the resources that God gives me for my life. And so that's why, again, it's not a casual relationship with prayer that Paul wants to present. It's not like, if you've got a chance, you have time, you're not doing anything else, why don't you pray? I mean, he could say that, right? If that's the vision he wanted to give us about how should you think of prayer, something, it's really a secondary matter. So, something, again, if you can get to it. That's not what he says, though. He uses a word that points to, again, a very passionate, a very engaged, a very fervent approach to what prayer is. And so, again, I like it because all of the action that points us to in terms of our intent to make choices, to then do the things God would have us to do for him to accomplish his will in our lives. So be joyful in hope, patient in affliction, faithful in prayer, share with God's people who are in need, practice hospitality. Up to this point, Paul has said a lot about our attitude towards God and people, what our thoughts should be towards that. But at this point, what he turns to is, again, the attitude that is the focus is practical. What are we doing with the practical needs that we confront? And so, one thing I want to say before we get to here, I had it in my notes last week and I didn't mention it then, so I've got to mention it now. As we think about the nature that the situation that we're in and how that makes kind of social distancing necessary, how Zoom has become such a normal and natural thing to do, just realize that, to the extent that these things being available on Zoom increases its availability to you, just realize it also reinforces your accountability. Now what's your excuse? Now what's your reason? Why weren't you at Bible? So I couldn't make the drive, couldn't leave the kids, well, it's on your computer. Couldn't make the prayer breakfast, sorry, didn't. What? You can't sit in front of your computer for an hour and pray with people? Now, a thought that I've had is, maybe we're being presumptuous, and I wouldn't say that Saturday on, a third Saturday of the month at 9 o'clock is the only time to pray. But, what would be neat if, what is your best time to pray? What is the best time for you to pray corporately with people? And let us know what that is. And we'll find someone else that also that's a good time for you for them to pray. And you guys can use the Zoom link that we have to pray together. How about that? Wouldn't that be neat? That we had different pockets of, 6 a.m. is good for me. 10 p.m. is good for me. 1 a.m. is good. All right, well, let us know. Now again, where are the excuses? Oh, well, that's not a good time for me. I don't want to be with people. I can't be the build-up. You sit in front of your computer and pray with someone? Again, to the extent that we've got, to me, independent of anything that happens as far as getting back to normal, these things will never go away in terms of the availability of that, because I think it does. I get that, I couldn't make it. When I thought about driving there and driving back, I just couldn't have the time. I could only give you a half hour. Well, give me a half hour. And that's not me a half hour. This is not about me. This is about God. This is about relationship. This is God establishing something amongst his people, in you, in terms of what we engage in together. And I just think it's neat to think that, what if it was 24 hours a day that someone was on that Zoom link praying? Maybe that's ambitious for a church our size. But, if it was consistent, if we had 70% of the people at Living Hope engaging in a Zoom prayer time, that would be awesome. And to be honest, I think we'd see God move. I think there's a lot of things that God does without our permission. But then there's other things that God is saying, I'm going to wait for you to pray. I'm going to wait for you to ask for that. Have you ever done that with your kids? That, I could help, I could step in, but I'm going to wait for them to ask. Because I want what? I want them to connect with what I'm doing or whatever. And so I think there are just some things that God is sitting back and saying, until they ask for it, I'm not giving it. I still love them, they're still gracious, still merciful, but prayer is something that, God calls us to. And again, we don't do it because of what we get from it, but we do it because God has called us to it. God is calling us to relationship. And what is neat about corporate prayer, praying together, is the human relationships that are built over prayer. Those are good relationships in terms of what you become aware of in each other's lives. You know, you get to the point where we share in each other's burdens. You rejoice with those who rejoice, and you mourn with those who mourn. Well, no better place to find that out and be engaging in that but than praying with each other. Boy, a great thing happened to you. Let's praise God together. A bad thing's happened to you. Let's be sad over it. Let me mourn you with it. But then let me pray for you in terms of that. And so just you know, I think what we do need to do when we think about what God is calling us to in these aspects, we have to break the box. We gotta find a way to make it happen. You know, particularly when it comes to, again, the focus being practical, and this talking about practical needs. I'm not sure what the next slide says, so there you go. Share here means to enter into fellowship, to make oneself a share or a partner. It gives a sense of entering into the needs of others so their needs are like our own. Like, just think about when you have a practical need. You internalize that again, that's my need. I have responsibility over it. What this word points to is a connectedness in relationship. So because I know you, your needs are like my needs. You know, you need to build a shed. I need to build a shed. You need to get this project done. You need it done. I need it. You get what I'm saying, right? That we're so connected in relationship. See, this is not about throwing money at things. You know, I think I won't go into government and how I think it's so wrong that government has taken over so many things the church should be doing because they do a bad job with it. But one benefit that the church brings in terms of engaging with the needs of people is it's based in relationship. It's based in Christ. It's based in humility. It's based in service. It's based in the power of God. But again, we know each other to the point where I know your needs. You know, I think this is a very, one reason why I'm, continuing to go through Romans rather than doing topics this summer is that so much here is so applicable to where we are. Because what I've noticed about Corona is how its effect is very disparate, different. In other words, one person isn't affected at all, another person is affected greatly. One person loses their job, another person is busy beyond imagination in terms of just all that they're doing and money they're making and so on and so forth. And yet, how do we connect those people? I've been saying this for months now. How do we find out where the needs are? Because you know something? There's a responsibility we have towards each other. You know, we have to recognize that this is primarily to God's people. It does say, share with God's people who are in need. I do think that would translate primarily to a local assembly. You know, when I think about the relationship that is being pointed to here, I think like God ordained the local assembly. God recognized the need for a local assembly. And so I think he gathers people within a church to make this all manageable. Share with God's people who are in need. Yeah, that may be in India. That may be in Indiana. That may be, but far more manageable. It's the people in Living Hope, the people in South County, the people in a region. You know, I think that we think more in terms of what is practically known. Again, when you think about the nature of relationship that is being pointed to here in terms of us engaging together, and then through that engaging and my care for people, then that comes. Then I'm aware of that. One other thing I would say about that is that the thought went away. And so just again, but it is practical, it is financial in nature, but again, it flows from the care. It really flows again from that love must be sincere. As far as practicing hospitality, Paul uses another pretty strong word here. It is to pursue, to seek after eagerly, earnestly endeavor to acquire. And so, and in hospitality, the word actually means a fondness or affection for strangers. And so, see, what this means is that rather than a need being presented to you, like in other words, you find out, or maybe again, someone comes to you and says, hey, can I come to lunch at your house? Yes, hospitality would say, do that. But what this means in terms of pursuing it, seeking after it eagerly, earnestly endeavor to acquire it, it means that I'm seeking it out. That I come to church on Sunday and say, someone's coming home to lunch with me. And I'm going to find out who that person is. That's what this verse would encourage you to do. What this verse would say is if you have never had someone in your house from your church, that's a bad thing. And maybe it doesn't have to be your house. Maybe our homes are different from what it was there. We have a different orientation. But if you've never gone to coffee with someone, well, and I would even say someone you don't know. See, it's one thing, and it's important to be with people you know, to love on people that you're connected to, that have similar circumstances to you. You talk to them every week. You're purposeful to be on the phone. What this fondness or affection for strangers, I mean, to the extent you probably could extend this to the world, but how about starting with the strangers that are part of an assembly? What about, again, I don't know this person. Well, why not pursue them, earnestly endeavor to acquire a hospitable arrangement with them? That's what it's talking about. And again, is that hard? Does that stretch you? Oh, it's all the good news. God is love and He's powerful. I like that. Talk about that, Pastor. But practice hospitality. I have to engage with people? Like I have to want to do that? Like I pursue that? Like I do that on purpose? Yeah, some people that's very easy. Other people it's not. You know, those of you who have the gift of hospitality, you probably have to show us what that looks like. Like someone might have to receive your hospitality in you having the gift of hospitality where they say, oh, so that's what that looks like. That's what it feels like to have someone walk up to you. Maybe it's not the Sunday of, but the Sunday before. Hey, how'd you like to next Sunday go out for coffee? Oh, I didn't die after that happened. Maybe I can do that as well. Yeah, because for when you consider people's hesitation, I might crumble, I might disintegrate if I went over someone's house or I had someone in my house. I promise you won't. But that's what that means. So if you've never done it, it's time to get out of your comfort zone and do it. And again, it's not wrong to know people. It's not wrong to like people. It's not wrong to engage with people you know. But this is a fondness for strangers, an affection for people you don't know. I mean, just think about how great a church would be that someone new comes in the congregation and within the first 2 months, 3 or 4 people have invited that person to their house or invited them out for coffee. That's the way it should. Do you think that person would feel welcomed? Do you think that person would kind of get connected to the body? Yeah. Well, that's what it's talking about. You know, I am really falling in love with Romans 12. It's almost becoming my favorite chapter in the book, in the Bible, because of the fact that the balance it has in terms of God's provision and what He's doing for us, renewing our minds and testing and approving God's will. We have the gifts to be the people He wants us to be. Now go do it. Love must be sincere. Hate what's evil. Cling to what is good. Don't think of yourself more higher than you ought. You know, be joyful in hope, patient in affliction, fervent in prayer, and then share with people. Like if all that stuff of love and affection and brotherhood and family doesn't translate to practical needs, it doesn't translate to engagement, doesn't translate to hospitality, again, doesn't translate to you welcoming someone that you don't know, it's just not what God envisions. It's not what God desires. It's not part of His plan. It's not what He wants to make us to be. He wants a church to be very connected. Now, all of a sudden, Corona, you can't be in people's houses. You can't even practically go for coffee. You know, figure out a way. I just don't think we say, okay, Corona makes this really hard, so maybe I shouldn't do it. I think we need to do it more. Because you know what Corona does? Corona makes lonely people more lonely. And if there's anything we need to do in terms of strangers, is connect with them. Connect with people we don't know. Like if you're connecting with people and talking with people all the time, think about people in the church that don't have that. Find out who they are and make sure you're calling them. And I've never talked to you in my life. Been in the church together for 3 years. You know something? Get over it. Apologize. I'm sorry. Should have done this 2.5 years ago. But boom. How'd you like to talk? How'd you like? Boy, 7 o'clock on Tuesday is a good day for me to pray. How about you? Find a way. Don't let the circumstance of the world keep you from doing what God desires, because I think, like I said, those things are more necessary now. Because the more disconnected we become, the more important it is for it to be connected in terms of God's purpose, His provision, and the effects that brings in our life. Well, I can't not get to 14, because when you talk about hard, and maybe we'll just end with this. Again, I talked about good news and bad news, right? God's great, He's good, He's powerful, prayer, fervent, joyful in hope, patient in affliction. Joyful in hope, patient in affliction. Fervent in prayer, that's kind of hard. Sharing in other people's needs, I might need to give money to people. I have to be with people that I don't know. Well, what about this? Bless those who persecute, bless and do not curse. This word, bless, is actually the word. Do I have it up on the slide? Nope. Next one. Actually, 2 more. Yeah. Well, first 13 doesn't stretch. How about first? Blessed is eulogeo. It's where we get our word eulogy from. Eulogy. When someone passes and you stand up and you say good things about them. What they're saying is, you say that about people that are persecuting you. The result of that is the next slide, which is, so we are to speak well about the ones who are not speaking well of us. How hard is that? What is your default when someone curses you? Curse them back, right? I'm going to give you what you give me, right? But see, God turns the tables. God turns the tables and says, let's take that human reaction and don't think about how they've treated you. You think about how you would want to be treated. So therefore, as you're being cursed and you don't like that, rather than returning the curse to them, you give them what you would want from them. And you bless. You say good things about them. That's what it means. Blessing, you could extend that to a Hebrew sense of, the blessing of God and how it just involves all aspects of life and giving them gifts and doing good things for them. But let's just start with, again, what the Greek word means, which is when they're saying bad things about you, you're saying good things about them. How often does that happen? How hard is that? But to know that that's what God empowers us to do. Again, when we think about, if I'm able to be patient in affliction, if I can learn to bless people that curse me, maybe I can bless my wife. Maybe I can bless my husband who's not cursing me, or even if they are, I'm blessing them. Like if I do this to enemies, like if God calls me to say, something, share with those who are in need, practice hospitality, love must be sincere. Well, if that's absent at home, maybe that's a place to start in there. So if someone is cursing you, and bless them. So, even if they're not cursing, bless. Can you bless your wife? Can you bless your husband? Can you say good things about them? That's, you would be hard-pressed to say that the report you should be giving other people really about anyone is negative. Let me feed you with negative thoughts about this person. I find that in the Bible. If I'm supposed to eulogize, I'm supposed to say good things, bless people that are cursing me. Well, what if that's, again, someone at home? What if that's my child? Again, what if that's my parent? Just watch that. Maybe a person, maybe one would you pray, but watch that. Because again, the words that should be coming out of our minds should be edifying, building people up. And again, when we think about the hard stuff, it's here. Bless those who persecute you, bless and do not curse. It's interesting to me that Paul says it twice. Just in case you didn't understand it the first time, let me tell you again, make sure you bless them and don't curse. Oh, by the way, and bless them and don't curse. Oh, did you forget? And bless them and don't curse. Yeah, let's bow and let's pray. Father, it is good to know that you empower us for this, that we, your word says people will persecute us if we live a godly life, if we stand for truth, if we represent the gospel, we declare the truth of the cross, yeah, we're going to be persecuted. But Father, your word says we're to bless here. I just pray that you be with us, that you give us that capacity, you grow us in our own lives, that you teach us how to be hospitable, you teach us how to be patient in affliction, to be fervent in prayer, to share with each other's need, to figure out how we get over that, how we overcome the challenges of social distancing and being on computer and all these different things. I just pray that we overcome. As I said to my daughter yesterday, we are not overcome by obstacles. We overcome obstacles. We are not overcome by them. And so, Father, I just pray that that would be the kind of people that we are. As we seek to follow your word, as we seek to live out the dictates of what is expressed here, understanding that it is your word, it is what you would have, and again, you never lead where you don't empower. And so we're grateful that we can be these kind of people because of what you're doing in our lives. And so, Father, we lift this before you in the matchless name of your Son, Jesus. Amen.